in chapter 5, we're going to be continuing our study of this, really the two chapters concerning the throne scene here this morning. But before we get into chapter 5, we're going to quickly remind ourselves of our outline of the book and remind ourselves of the rules that we're trying to remember for our study of the book of Revelation. The theme of the book of Revelation is about victory in the Lamb. We get that from chapter 17, verse 14, which is the key verse. These will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called, chosen, and faithful. And so this victory in the Lamb and the conflict really between the dragon and the Lamb is what the latter half will focus on, is what Revelation is pointing to. So as we begin the book in the first 11 chapters, we've got the conflict on earth. So we've talked about, this section is where we've got the persecution that's taking place from the Romans on the Christians. And then in 12 to 22 is the conflict between the Lamb and the dragon. Now, as we've said, we come back to Rome, right? Babylon the Great and the fall. That all takes place in 12 to 22. But the reason for that conflict, the conflict between the Lamb and dragon, which is what 12 to 22 focuses on. We've been reminding ourselves of these rules, and we want to especially remind ourselves as we're starting to get into, I guess, the more difficult sections, if you will, of the book in terms of 2 and 3. We didn't have as much, we had some figurative language, but it wasn't as difficult as what some of these things of the visions are going to be later on. And so as we go to Revelation, into Revelation, we need to remember these 6 rules. The book was written to encourage the people of John's day. It is largely symbolic. It heavily used Old Testament terminology, not to press the details of the symbolism, to interpret the book in light of clear biblical passages, and to visualize or picture the visions in your mind, almost as if you're watching a movie, is what John is describing is unfolding. As we've said, this is particularly important with rules 1, 2, and 4 in terms of, we get to something, and we talked about some of these on Wednesday. What are these four living creatures? And we said, well, the quotes, I think the 4 living creatures is some type of heavenly being, some type of rank of angel or something, though it is distinguished from angels in chapter 5, but maybe some type of specific rank of heavenly being. Several commentators agree with that. Some take another position and say, well, I think the 4 living creatures represent certain characteristics of God. Others say, I think it is representing the fourfold division of different living creatures, right? You've got the livestock represented by the cow, the wild represented by the lion, humanity represented, and those of the air represented by the eagle. Well, that may be true. At the end of the day, regardless of which of the 3 it is, the point of chapter 4 is God is on his throne and in control. So while we can try to understand and we discuss those things, at the end of the day, we want to remember what the key takeaway is, what the point of these chapters are. We're going into chapter 5. Chapter 5 will simply title The Lamb and the Scroll. That's really what chapter 5 is about. We'll come back to that in a second. First, verse 12. Verse 12 is the key verse. Saying with a loud voice, worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and riches and wisdom and strength and honor and glory, blessing. That's really what the key is here. The key verse to this chapter is. This again, we referenced this the other day. This is a breakdown of every occurrence of throne in chapters 4 and 5. As we talked about, chapter 4 we call the throne scene. 5 is sort of a continuation of that, though the focus is on the Lamb and scroll. But we have, in a total of 12 verses, 17 different occurrences of throne. Now again, keep this in mind. We are excluding the use of thrones in verse 4, where it says there were 24 thrones, and on the thrones, those 24 thrones were 24 elders. We're not focused on the word thrones there. We're talking about just God being on the throne and the Lamb approaching that throne. Verse 2 of chapter 4. Immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne sat in heaven, and one sat on the throne. Verse 3. And he who sat there was like a jasper and sardius stone in appearance, and there was a rainbow over the throne in appearance like an emerald. I'm not going to read all the rest of these, but I'll give you the references. Verse 4, verse 5, verse 6, verse 9, and verse 10 of chapter 4. In chapter 5, verse 1, verse 6, verse 7, verse 11, and verse 13. Those are all occurrences talking about the throne and the one upon the throne and the Lamb approaching the throne in these two chapters. Now, we originally planned, and we didn't get this far the other day, but we had said before that our hope was to cover 4 and 5 together, and this is the reason. 4 and 5 you can think of as a unit of chapters, or a pairing of these two chapters. Chapter 4, again, is focused on what? God is in control and on the throne. Chapter 5, though, there needs to be some carrying out of a plan. So there's a scroll in the hand of the one, and we'll get to this more in a minute, in the hand of the one on the throne, and they need to find somebody worthy to open the scroll. That's what 5 is going to focus on, and the Lamb who opens the scroll. Now remember this, from this point forward, we've said there's 2 focuses of the book. God is on his throne and in control, chapter 4. And the second and the main focus is victory in Christ, or specifically as we title it, victory in the Lamb. We're introduced to the Lamb here in chapter 5, at least in terms of the rest of the point of Revelation. The Lamb is brought up here. He'll be called the Lamb again, the Lamb being Christ. As we get into chapter 5, verses 1 to 4 is the unopenable scroll. Now, if you're thinking, well, he opens it later on. Yes, it's open later on. But at this point, what is the scroll, at least appear to be? Closed, and it cannot be opened. At least that's how it appears. The first thing we have is there's the one who sits on the throne has a scroll in his hand, verse 1. And I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll written inside and on the back, sealed with 7 seals. Now, as we talk about the scroll, I want to point out a couple of things. If somebody's reading through Revelation for the very first time, and you get to chapter 5, and as we'll see later on, the scroll is open, the thought is, well, what is on the scroll? That's what chapter 6 through chapter 11 is about. And we have the first seal, the second seal, so on and so forth, the opening of the seal. So, we don't deal in chapter 5 with the contents of the scroll, but that's what 6 through 11 is focused on, is what is on that scroll in 6 to 11. Now, the scroll was written inside and on the back. Now, if you're taking notes, if you're following in a lesson or you're writing on a piece of paper, today we would typically write on the front, and when we're done, we flip the paper over and we write on the back, right? That's common for us. The scrolls they had, the papers used for these scrolls, it wasn't really as advantageous to do that as it may be for us, right? We can use a pencil and do it, and we can do it where it doesn't bleed through too much. Back then, you didn't really write on both sides of the papers for the scroll. When you see an image of a scroll, right, you often see something that is written on one side and rolled up, and what's the outside, there's nothing on, and then you unroll it for the message. So why is it written on both sides? Well, much like the scroll of Ezekiel, again, they're heavily using Old Testament terminology, and books like Ezekiel and Daniel and Zechariah and Isaiah come in handy in Revelation because there are some sections where some apocalyptic, particularly in Ezekiel, Daniel, and Zechariah, some apocalyptic language used. And so, the scroll, like that of Ezekiel's day, is written on both sides. What that means is it's full or complete. There's nothing that needs to be added. Whatever the contents of the scroll are, that's what's going to happen, and there's nothing that needs to be added to it. The second thing is it was sealed with 7 seals. Now, what does the number 7 mean? Complete or perfect. So when there's 7 seals, it is completely or perfectly sealed. That is, it is tamper-proof. Um, if you can imagine for a minute, on your house, you probably have 2 locks on most doors, right? You have a lock at the bottom and on the door knob, and then you have a lock at the top, a deadbolt. You may have a third lock. You may have a chain. The more locks you have, the less likely somebody's going to be able to break in. There's 7 seals. It's perfectly sealed. Nobody's going to be able to tamper or mess with the message. That's the point being made in there being the seven seals. Now, in verse 2, then, we have a question asked by a strong angel. What's a strong angel? Perhaps an angel of high rank. We don't exactly know what it means by a strong angel, but we do know from the Bible there are ranks among the angels. So perhaps by strong angel, it simply means one that was of a high rank. But again, we don't know exactly what it means, but the point is focused on the content and his question. And his question is, who is worthy to open the scroll and to loose its seals? So I want you to think about this from 2 standpoints. One, who can open the scroll? But remember, where is the scroll at this point? Or, well, not the Lamb yet, it's in the right hand of the Father, right? So it's not just who's worthy to open, but who is worthy to go to the Father and take the scroll from the Father. Verse 4, or verse 3 then is the answer, at least the answer as of this moment. And no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or to look at it. So who can open the scroll? The answer as of verse 3 is, there is no one who can open the scroll. So what's John's reaction, verse 4? Steve. So I wept much because no one was found worthy to open and read the scroll or to look at it. Now again, I want you to back up to chapter 4 for a minute. After these things I looked, verse 1, and behold a door standing open in heaven, and the first voice which I heard was like a trumpet speaking with me, saying, come up here and I will show you things which must shortly take place. Now keep in mind, chapter 4 is not really the things that will shortly take place. What's going to shortly take place is the contents of the scroll. I would take what he's talking about in 6 to 11, that downfall of the downfall of Rome and all the things poured out. That's what's going to shortly take place. So now John's been told, I'm going to show you what's going to shortly take place. And then for a moment, it seems like, but the message can't be revealed. At least it seems for the moment. But then in verse 5 to 7, we're introduced to the Lamb. Listen to what is said in verse 5. But one of the elders, one of those 24, said to me, do not weep. Now let's stop there for a second. Again, we've said with these visions unfolding, you can sort of picture them in your mind. And if you sort of pause it if you were watching this as a movie and you pause it for a second, and the question was asked in verse 2, who is worthy? The answer in verse 3 is no one. John's reaction in verse 4 is to weep. And then one of the elder says, do not weep. And we pause it there. Without going any further, you know at this point there is what? There's someone. There is some hope. Otherwise, John should go on weeping. Do not weep. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has prevailed to open the scroll and to loose its seals. Now, here it talks about, it uses 2 terms to describe Christ. We haven't got to the Lamb yet, which is the same character, but we're going to get to the Lamb in verse 6. But in verse 5, he's first called the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Now, I want you to keep your finger here, your marker here in Revelation, but go to Genesis 49 with me. This is what John has reference to. Now, remember again, we said Isaiah, Ezekiel, latter half of Daniel, Zechariah are very helpful in our study of Revelation, but they're far from the only books. The other books of the Old Testament can be very helpful. Some of them can too. Genesis is one of those here in Genesis 49. Genesis 49 is where David, or not David, Jacob is blessing his sons. And here's what he says in verse 9. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He bows down, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who shall rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the people. And so, when you take Genesis chapter 49 and what is said, Genesis 49, 9 and 10 is a messianic prophecy, referring to Christ as the lion's whelp, or Shiloh, and said that the scepter would not depart from Judah. So when he says the lion of the tribe of Judah, he's referring back to Genesis 40, or when he said the lion of the tribe of Judah, he's referring back to Genesis 49, that the Messiah was going to be the lion's whelp out of the tribe of Judah. The second term is, he calls him the root David. And being the root of David likely refers to this. He is both a descendant, David, come from the offspring of David, but he's also a root in the sense that he's also the source of David, because he is here. Think about 2 Samuel 7. The term root is not used there, but in 2 Samuel chapter 7, that's where the prophecy is given about the one who would sit on David's throne, the offspring of David that would sit on his throne. Isaiah 11:1 and verse 10 does not use the term root of David, but it actually uses the term the root of Jesse. Jesse is David's father. And so, again, the same kind of idea. You can also think about in Matthew where Jesus is asked, or where Jesus asks the question about why David called him Lord if he's his offspring. It's sort of the same idea. He's the offspring of David, but at the same time, he's the source of David because he is the creator. So we've got the lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David. So verse 6, and I looked, and behold, in the midst of the Lamb and of the four living creatures, and in the midst of the elders, stood a what? Lamb. You can kind of imagine for a minute. Imagine again, picturing this in your mind, that you're in John's shoes, picturing this vision, and one of the elders says to you, you know what? We have hope because of the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And you're turning to look, and what are you expecting to see? A lion. You're expecting to see this sort of menacing, fierce creature, and you turn, and there stands Lamb. And not just the lamb, by the way, a lamb as though it had been slain. That has reference, obviously, to the crucifixion of Christ. And so here's a lamb that, as though it had been slain, standing there. I almost picture it in my mind. Imagine a lamb standing there, almost as if his throat was slit to be put to death, and yet he is still standing and living, and as if everything is normal. And so, going back to chapter 1, the one that was dead but is alive. And so, there stands the Lamb as though he had been slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into the earth. So, 7 horns. Well, what does that mean? Well, let's go back again to our Old Testament. And we're not going to trace all of these references. You can write them down. The slides will be on the website later on with all of these references. But horn, and your book references too, the horn represents power or authority. 1 Samuel 2:10, the adversaries of the Lord shall be broken into pieces. From the heaven he will thunder against them. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king. He will exalt the horn of his anointed. Psalm 75:10. What is he saying? Well, it represents authority. That is, the Lamb, being God, is omnipotent and so he's all powerful, and he also has all authority. Matthew 28 and in verse 18. So where does authority rest? Well, there's the Father who's on the throne and in control, but the Son has authority and power. The second one, and this is the one you'll hear, they sort of all come out at the same place, but we sort of go, I guess, for lack of a better term, we sort of go the roundabout way to end up in the same spot for the most part. among commentators is the eyes. And when you hear 7 eyes, the first thought is, well, 7 eyes, the fact that God is, and the Lamb is omniscient, right? He knows everything. He sees everything. I give the quote here from Haley, who said this in his commentary, because the text says 7 eyes and then refers to the 7 spirits. Here's what Haley has to say. In 4:5, the 7 spirits are before the thrones as burning torches. All that on Wednesday. Here they are sent forth into all the earth, bearing witness, John 15:26, back in chapter 4, and revealing the truth, John 16:13, right? The work of the Spirit being that helper. And so, as the Lamb is omnipotent, having 7 horns, and omniscient, having 7 eyes, he's also omnipresent through his 7 spirits, the Holy Spirit, whom he sent forth to the apostles, through whom he revealed it to human family himself, the truth and his power, which is everywhere at all times. And so he's saying, the Spirit, being part of the Godhead, is part of what makes God, sort of summarize, makes God omniscient and omnipresent. The Son wasn't physically on earth, but how was he present in that sense? The Spirit was there to be that helper or guide, revealing the truth to the apostles. And so he sees in those, he's seeing and knowing all when the Spirit was doing that work on earth. He still sees and knows all. And so when you take the 7 horns and the 7 eyes, he's all powerful, he's all knowing, he's 7 spirits, he's ever present. Here's what's said now in verse 7. Then he came and took the scroll out of the right hand of him who sat on the throne. Now, if you read it, when you read it in English, you could picture this a number of ways. You could picture sort of like the Lamb just slowly makes his way over and scroll away. Now, some have raised the question, how's that possible? How could the Lamb take the scroll? Lambs don't have hands. Remember, this is a figurative and it's also a vision. What's possible in a vision? Anything. Okay? I mean, he has 7 eyes and he has 7 horns. I don't think him grabbing the scroll is the most thing that stands out the most of the description of this lamb here. He's standing up those slain. It's all figurative. We're not, the problem that often happens in Revelation when you read some commentators and some students of it have trouble is trying to picture this as if it's actually taking place. It's figurative, representing something. But the Lamb in verse 7 takes the scroll. Now, again, you can sort of picture the Lamb just almost as if it's just sort of walking over, taking the scroll. Or you ever going to hand something to somebody? Maybe you hand something to a kid and they're sort of hesitant at first. That's not the picture. We can't really see it in our English, but Summer said in his commentary, the Lamb came, the aorist tense, picturing the whole action in one flash, and taketh the book. That is, when the way Summers is describing it, it's not, it says the Greek is describing it. It's not like sort of came over and then he just took it and left. It's one swift action. The Lamb came and just sort of snatched up the scroll. Well, only one who could take the scroll and with that kind of confidence is one who is worthy. Right, that was the question we began with earlier in the chapter. Who is worthy to open the scroll? Well, then he came, took the scroll out of the right hand of him who sat on the throne. And then, again, we get to chapter 6. The seals as they're being broken and opened in chapter 6 later on. The answer is, who's worthy? It is the lamb or the lion, however, as he's described in Revelation 5. Now, the rest of the chapter then is praise to the worthy lamb, with the exception of 13 and 14, which is actually praise both the Father and to the Son in verses 13 and 14. But beginning at verse 8, it says, Now when he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each having a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. If you stop for a second, you realize he came and he took the scroll in verse 7. When does the scroll start opening? Chapter 6, verse 1. Now, they know now, though, because he has the scroll. He's the one worthy to come take the scroll. When they praise him, they say, you are worthy to take the scroll and to what? Open its seals. You're worthy to approach the one on the throne, to take the scroll and be the one to open it. Again, chapter 6, that's when we really see them actually being, or in the vision being opened, and what takes place beginning at chapter 6. But in verse 8, he says, the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, and the 4 living creatures, and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each having a harp, that being used for praise, and a golden bowl full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. Here's an encouraging thing to those that are listening, or that are reading this. In the midst of persecution, they may have prayed that the Lord would take the persecution away. They may have prayed for who knows what concerning the persecution. They may have felt like God's not answering our prayers. What does this tell us, though, in verse 8? The bowls full of incense in the hands of the 24 elders are the prayers of who? Saints. So they made it there. This incense, and incense, again, the idea, as it going up and the sacrifice, and this a thing that's sweet to God in the sacrifice, talks about the sweet smelling aroma with sacrifice. Not physically, but in terms of what it means to God when we offer sacrifice. This idea of it being incense is the prayers are there before throne, right? God has heard the prayers. He may not have answered it how we wanted it. I think about 2 Corinthians chapter 12, and Paul talks about praying that the thorn in the flesh be removed, but it wasn't. And so it's not that God didn't hear the prayers. The answer may just not be what we want. But here's what they said, verse 9. And they sang a new song, saying, new in the sense that it's something like hadn't been heard before. Here in this case, this song is about the worthy Lamb. Now, we have songs. We've sang some in our supplemental. There's some in the, we don't have them printed, haven't taught them here, but there's several newer songs that are based off this idea about worthy is the Lamb, worthy the Lamb that was slain, that convey that message. They said, you are worthy to take the scroll. This is that new song. You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain and have redeemed us to God by your blood out of every tribe and tongue and people and nation, and have made us kings and priests to our God. We shall reign on the earth. So when he talks about it, there are 4 things I want you to notice about the description. The earlier part we're more familiar with. You're worthy. You took the scroll, so clearly the Lamb is worthy. We know the Lamb was slain because it was told to us. He was standing there as though slain back in verse 6. But he says, you redeemed us to or for God. Now, God redeemed us so we can be saved. We're redeemed so we can be saved. But in a sense, we're redeemed to or for God in that we can be used for God's use and to carry out his purpose and to teach his will. It's by your blood. That is, only by a sacrifice are we redeemed. Out of every tribe and tongue and people and nation. There are no boundaries to this kingdom that's talked about. It's out of every nation, and you made us kings and priests. I think of 1 Peter 2 and in verse 9, as well as Exodus 19:6, which Peter has reference to. And that is about being a kingdom of priests. It's not kings and priests. We're a kingdom of priests. We're part of his kingdom and shall reign on the earth. Things may seem dark, but we are servants of the worthy Lamb who've been redeemed and have that hope. Verse 11 now. Then I looked and I heard the voice of many angels around the throne, the living creatures and the elders, and the number of them was 10,000 times 10,000 and thousands of thousands. Again, not to be taken literally. There's just they're all there praising God. Here's what they're saying, or the Lamb, saying with a loud voice, worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and riches and wisdom and strength and glory, or in honor and glory and blessing. So not only is the one on the throne worthy to be praised, who else is worthy to be praised? According to chapter 5, the Lamb, or Christ. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive riches, wisdom, strength, honor, glory, and blessing. Then in verse 13, and every creature which is in heaven and on the earth and under the earth, and such as are in the sea and all that are in them, I heard saying. Now again, symbolic language, it's pictured as though, imagine, go out and all the birds were gathered in one place, and all the sea creatures gathered in one place, and all of humanity gathered in one place, and that all the creatures could talk, and they're all praising the one on the throne and all praising the Lamb. Verse 13, blessing and honor and glory and power be to him who sits on the throne, to the Father, and to the Lamb forever and ever. So we have the Father and the Son, both worthy of praise. Then the four living creatures said, Amen, or let it be so. And the 24 elders fell down and worshipped him who lives forever and ever. Well, who lives forever and ever? Both the Father, the one on the throne, and the Lamb. As though he was slain, but he is living. They both live forever and ever. And so that is the Lamb taking the scroll here in chapter 5. Lord willing, on Wednesday, we'll get into chapter 6. Chapter 6 now, we're going to start opening those scrolls.